Some of the certifications that they deem as most viable to their lifestyle and their choices and their interactions within the ag industry. And then we're also going to be talking about some motivations and also some issues and some policies that consumers have as well when it comes to thinking about the ag industry here in the state of Colorado. And like Adrian said, we're going to be having a time for Q&A at the end of this presentation. So a little bit about the attitudes survey. So this is a representative sample of Colorado residents. We try to get about 1,000 residents every 5 years, where we ask them about natural resources, agricultural practices, consumer habits, contribution of agriculture to Colorado's economy. And the answers and the analysis that we do with those answers really helps us inform the engagement, the education, and policy efforts across the state of Colorado. We've had an incredible partnership with the Colorado Department of Agriculture for several years, being able to do this survey with them multiple times. And they're gracious enough to not only allow us to do the analysis of the survey results, but then inform some of our practices here at CSU in Extension and also the College of Agricultural Sciences. So looking at some of the demographics of the folks that were part of this survey this past year, when folks were taking it in the summer and spring of 2022, there's about 1,103 residents that were representing the state of Colorado with their voices. 432 of those have ever lived or worked on a farm, so significantly less than half of folks have that personal background in agriculture. And 75 currently live or work on a farm, ranch, or a homestead. About 21% of our respondents were from a rural background. And then also you can see that with the rest of some of these demographic information, that we really were able to get a pretty good swath and plethora of folks from across the state that was very representative actually of our current census data as well here in the state of Colorado. So starting off with just some very general attitudes of what these folks had to say. In their survey instrument, there was a little over 40 questions asked, anywhere from basic demographic questions, where they go shopping, what kind of food labeling they see most incentivizing of their purchasing habits. And so some of the great things that we're able to pull from this is really looking at some of these large themes that we see. And so as you can see, 79% of those folks that were surveyed consider the presence of ranches, farms, and agriculture to be very important to the quality of life here in the state of Colorado. Also, 73% consider that the food and agriculture industry is very important to the state's future economic resiliency. As you think about how agriculture contributes over $40 billion to our state's economy annually, it's really good to know that our consumers and the folks just out in the state are also understanding the weight of the significance of the ag industry. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Martha to kick it off with the next portion.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So yes, now we want to dive into what drives consumers to purchase and to consume Colorado food and ag products. So, and I think there's, if you want to switch, yep, there we go, great. So there's a lot of really great information in this survey. So we're going to explore some of this. Just know that there'll be other opportunities for you to learn about these survey results. So on this slide, what I want you all to be thinking about is, this shows us two things. One is, what were the factors that are very motivating in terms of compelling consumers to purchase and eat Colorado products, and then what were not at all motivating. And so we're going to look at, those two extremes and just see what is encouraging them and what is not. So if we look at those blue bars on the very left, you can see that our respondents said, just in general, that, chef demos and recipes, almost 50% of respondents said, they're really not that compelling. On 17% said, yes, they are very motivating. So that's how you read this chart. So we'll kind of move across towards the right and start to see what is very motivating to consumers. And this is overall. So you can see, looking at, having better taste in produce, understanding the economic benefits to farmers and ranchers, the state, those are important. But then where we really see some standout responses where they are very motivating to consumers is feeling confident about sustainability practices and that producers are using the best practices. And that's 54% of all consumers. Price, of course, we see that every time. Price is very motivating. But then on that far right, 68% of all respondents said that feeling confident about best food safety practices is really motivating. So that's a very interesting, I think, and compelling response. So, just to keep in mind too, as we break that down, we saw food safety as a compelling factor. 61% of those who are 18 to 34 years old, so looking at that younger demographic, said that food safety was motivating. 68% of 35 to 64-year-olds said that it was, and then 76% of those who are 65 and older felt that food safety was really important. So, just looking at some of our demographic segments there, and as you can see, as our consumers age, they're a lot more concerned about food safety. So next, we want to talk about what is local and, how do consumers identify, define, how do they value local? So let's look at a little information then. So you can see we did ask a question, when you shop for fruits, vegetables, meat and dairy and other products, what does local mean to you? So lots of people have a different picture in their mind, and you can see we gave the respondents a variety of options. But by far and above, most people said that local means that the product is produced in Colorado. And you can see that's very consistent. We've got survey results from 2011, from 2016, and from 2022. And really the preponderance of results are our respondents agreeing that the product is from Colorado, and that means local. But you can also see, there are some folks who say, well, if it's produced in the county where I live, then that's local, or if it's produced within 100 miles. So they have a little bit of a different version of local. And so one of the things that did stand out in the survey was we had a significant proportion of rural buyers who said, well, if it's produced in the county where I live, then that means local. And then we also saw some urban and suburban buyers who said, yes, produced in Colorado or within about 100 miles from where I live. So, you can see there are basically two takeaways here is that, produced in Colorado, Colorado Proud is still, it carries a lot of weight for the majority of consumers, but there are also opportunities to capture additional buyers, maybe through some hyper local branding or advertising. So next, we are going to look at, what people's confidence is. So they see a product that's labeled as local. So how confident are they that it really is local? And so this graph shows us this chart shows us from 2016 and 2022. So we've got two different times that the survey was administered. And what we can see is, first of all, the percentage of people who are very confident that something that is labeled local is local fell a little bit from 24% to 17%. The proportions that are somewhat confident, that remained about the same from the last time we did this survey. And then we can see we've got more people who are, kind of waffling there. We've got, now up to almost 32% who are fairly confident. But so we've moved a little bit. So, we maybe are starting to see that consumers aren't always sure what that something that they see labeled as local really is. But one interesting trend that we saw for this year was that, and people identified themselves as either being rural consumers, suburban, or urban. And interestingly, as our consumers were more urbanized, they felt more confident about the labels that they saw, really reflecting the fact that it was a local product. So just kind of an interesting finding there. As well as that middle, demographic, those who are 35 to 64 years old, they also felt that they had more confidence in something being labeled local as truly being local. So next, let's look at some marketing claims. So our next slide, we ask a variety of questions about, when shopping or eating out. So this was the question that was asked: how likely are the following claims to influence you to make a purchase? And so most of our respondents said that the way they got information is through product labels. So 70% of respondents said that, followed by word of mouth. So if we look at these different types of claims that people would typically see on a label, you can see that overall, these are the claims that people felt were, carried the most weight, the ones that were, the most likely to influence them to pull the trigger on a purchase. And so that's grown or raised in Colorado, made or crafted in Colorado, and then the Colorado Proud label. So you can see those place-based labels are really important. Fourth down the list is product of US. So not as specifically place-based, but interestingly enough, we saw that about 80% of our more rural buyers were influenced by product of the US compared to some of those other place-based claims. And then down the list, you can see grass-fed and finished, animal welfare approved, certified, humane, antibiotic-free. Those attributes were important, but just less important to the consumers we surveyed overall compared to those place-based claims. And interestingly enough, our urban buyers, those claims resonated and influenced them more than some of the other claims did. For example, the ones that were more product-based, gluten-free, certified, vegan, our urban buyers were a lot more interested in some of those certifications that help them better understand about the production or the processing behind that particular product that they were buying. So next slide, then we'll take a look at how aware Colorado consumers are about different products. So every year we ask, or every time that we conduct this survey, we pull out a couple of distinctively Colorado products and have consumers evaluate, how familiar they are with them. Have they ever heard of them? Have they heard of them but not purchased them? Or have they heard of them and purchased them? And so what we can see from this graph, this one's broken down by age of consumer. But overall, I can tell you that Palisade peaches had very high name recognition. And that was actually, about 90% over the whole set of respondents. Now, again, this breaks it down by age. And so what you can see is our younger consumers are in general less familiar with products. And so with Olathe sweet corn starting on the far left, Palisade peaches, Pueblo chilies, and Rocky Ford melons, they are, interestingly enough, familiar with Colorado beer and spirits if you look all the way over on the right. So those blue lines are that youngest segment of consumer. Whereas we see pretty consistently that our older consumers are more familiar with these kind of signature products. And that's really interesting, as well as the fact that the longer we see people are living in Colorado, the more familiar they are with these products. So they really start to become acquainted with these distinctive Colorado products. And in fact, we saw, for example, that people who had only been in the state for 1 to 2 years, 37% of them hadn't heard of Palisade peaches. If they'd been in the state 3 to 10 years, that dropped to 4%. So just kind of, interesting, and tells us you really need to keep that marketing and name recognition out in front of our new entrants to the state, because we need to help make them familiar too with these signature Colorado products. So then the next couple of slides show us how how people's familiarity with those products have changed just from the last survey in 2016 to 2022. And we think this is really significant. So we started in 2016, Palisade peaches, 71% had heard about them and purchased them. We had only 7% who'd never heard of them. That had really changed to 90% by the time we get to 2022, and then a really small proportion that had never heard of Palisade peaches. The same for Pueblo chilies. We're seeing some really great movement there. So we've got the the number of folks who had heard of Pueblo chilies and purchased them went from 34 to 61%. So yes, thanks to Mike Bartolo and the Chili Growers Association showing up those hatch chilies finally. So that's really exciting. So we're seeing some really great movement there. And then our last slide that looks at familiarity with these products. If we want to go to Rocky Ford melons. So we see some of the same change in consumer familiarity and purchasing. So we're moving now from 59% saying that they've heard of and purchased Rocky Ford melons to 76%. And again, for each of these smaller proportions of those who've never heard of the products at all. So we're doing some good marketing here. And then Olathe sweet corn, going from 62% who had heard of and purchased Olathe sweet corn in 2016 up to 75% in 2022. So I think we're doing some good promotion as an industry. So Dawn, I'll pass it on to you.
Thanks, Martha. And we also took some time to get some perceptions from Colorado households about their feelings about the use of various agricultural practices, because as we know, those are often in the limelight these days as people pay greater attention to what we're doing on our farms and ranches. So we look at the next slide. One thing we did just to see what people's awareness was is, we asked them, what were the top of mind products you think about when you think about Colorado agriculture? And kind of the size of those words represent kind of how common the mentions were across the 1,000 respondents. And the good news is, for the most part, those are pretty consistent with what we do grow, but it's also a pretty good indication of the visibility of those sectors. So that top box represents them when they simply were asked, what do you think about when you think of Colorado agriculture? The bottom box, we got more specific and asked people to talk about what was economically important. Notice marijuana pops up there, and we won't talk about that today. It's a different specialty crop, but all in all, we think there's a pretty good alignment with what people perceive and what is true. But what we would say, and that's good news for the produce sector, is partly probably because it does show up in direct markets, the produce sector has more visibility than you would actually expect for what share of the ag economy it is. And so that's great news for the sector. Next slide. And so we kind of asked people to kind of weigh in a little bit about how much they agree with some statements. To make this easier for you to absorb quickly, focus kind of on the percentages in the dark blue and light blue bars. Those are where we would say it is the Colorado public telling us that they agree with those statements. So not surprising in what Martha already said, local food systems are top of mind with folks. Overall, they're pretty supportive of us continuing to make investments at the state and federal level for what might help protect our soil and water resources, alternative energy, keeping food prices reasonable. But we do start seeing some softer support when we ask them about if we think there's currently enough being done to mitigate climate, land, and water challenges the state faces. And the agricultural labor area is another place where we see slightly softer support with those statements. Again, that's kind of just a signal to us that that's a place where there's both concerns to be addressed and progress to be made. And we're already seeing some of those programs take shape in the state. Next slide. We also asked people how important some specific characteristics of products were to their purchase decisions. Not surprisingly, freshness is top of mind and price. Those are the things that are very, very key to a person's eating experience and ability to get those. But again, you see local really standing up strong as something that this state supports, which is good news, particularly for those who are looking at direct markets. But they also see a variety of other things also are important to our folks as well. In general, though, I think we have programs that cover a lot of those. Oddly, this is one place where Colorado Proud got slightly softer support than we saw in earlier slides. So they may say they're supportive of it, but we're not sure they're looking at it on labels. Let's look a little deeper at some of these things. Just to remind you again, this is what Martha had already showed you before about grown and raised in Colorado, Colorado Proud, and product of the USA ranked as. I put that in as a counterpoint to what we just saw before, although they're still actually not always looking for that on labels, or as Martha mentioned before, trusting that the labels actually signifies the localness, and we can leave that discussion to questions and answers. Next slide. So again, that's mostly to show we see a lot of consistency in the survey, but there's also some places where we might want to dig deeper about what's going on in the marketplace. For instance, to the left here, we see this is where people are shopping now. And not surprisingly, retail keyline grocery stores are still where most people go shopping, and restaurants. But we're continuing to see survey after survey an increasing share of people going to direct markets like farmers markets and CSAs, specialty markets like those smaller bakery, deli, fish, cheese shops, and now food trucks and street vendors are actually really taking shape as a pretty big mover. Why that's interesting is to the right-hand side, you see then where those same Coloradans perceive the best support for Colorado farmers, ranchers, and food businesses and being able to find our products is at some of those direct markets and specialty markets. So again, this is where you put these two together and say, we're still mostly shopping at those main national chains and restaurants, but where people are looking when they're looking for your products might be a slightly different set of markets. And that's why we continue to need to think about how we would actually nurture more sales through some of those niche markets. Next slide. And if we look at motivations here, what we really find is that although local is very important to folks, on the left-hand side, let's look at the right-hand side where we see where the most change in motivation has happened over the last 5 or 6 years. What people are looking for is better labeling, and we're seeing labels really try to crunch in all the information they can. They want to see authentic farmer-rancher connections with products where possible. They do want more prepped and ready-to-eat foods, which is a challenge because, as we all know, that requires a whole different set of certifications and equipment for a lot of our producers. And they really want messages that's back to that farmer-rancher connection, that the purchases they're making have an economic benefit to the Colorado economy or to the producers they're buying from. Next slide. So with that, we're going to have Jonathan quickly wrap up with a couple of those broader questions again, and then we'll leave time for your questions and answers.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Don. So as we've been discussing, there's lots of things that consumers, need to be thinking about whenever it comes to agriculture and when it comes to what they're seeing at the local grocery store, right? And so just touching on a few of those, and specifically what it looks like to think about agriculture as stewards of our natural resources, and also kind of like what Don alluded to already when thinking about care for our agricultural workers, as well as humane practices when it comes to animals. So first, looking just at our natural resources and how we are, how folks are perceiving us stewarding those. So with a lot of folks were able to chime in on the 3 top of mind most important uses for water, and those being agriculture and food processing, thankfully, conservation, and then recreation. And then looking even deeper at how are we protecting and maintaining our land and water here in the state. About 88% of folks consider that maintaining land and water for agricultural purposes in Colorado is very important. And then 84% agree that public funds should be used to protect our soil and water here in the state. A little lower number here is the 43% agree that current Colorado ag practices are conserving our state's water and soil resources. So as significant as folks are saying that we, have our natural resources here in the state, we need to be thinking about how are we telling more of those stories about how we are actually putting and implementing best practices into our agricultural operations to conserve our natural resources and protect them. Again, looking at stewardship and how we're protecting the environment, especially looking at climate change. 18% of folks think that Colorado agriculture has almost always been responsible when it comes to protecting the environment and natural resources. And that is a pretty significantly low number. I believe the total number of folks that are saying it's mostly and then almost always is a little bit higher, but still not much. And so still thinking about how are we communicating to our consumers and to fellow stakeholders within the agricultural industry about how we are implementing those best practices. And also 14% of folks think that Colorado agriculture has almost always been responsible when it comes to responding to climate change. So when we think about the work that we do here at CSU and thinking about new methods and new mechanisms, especially whenever it comes to regenerative agricultural practices and thinking about climate smart solutions, those are some of the things that our consumers also have on top of mind and want to see some change. Quickly running through these, 45% of folks agree that agriculture is a contributor to climate change. But then 67%, 2/3 of folks agree that agriculture is an industry that can help mitigate the impacts of climate change. So I think that's a pretty comfortable position to be in, knowing that about 2/3 of folks have our support whenever it comes to looking into solutions for climate smart activities in agriculture. But there can obviously still be some improvement in that number as well. And then also with folks that are shopping or eating out, a little less than 50% said that they would likely be influenced by a marketing claim if it said that it was a climate smart production, or if there was climate smart practices when it comes to processing. So when it comes to agricultural practices, and this is something that Don had kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, as something where we're hoping to see some improvement and just more, discussions with folks about their perceptions on what they see here. But about 26% of folks are strongly agreeing that Colorado farmers and ranchers are responsible in caring for their agricultural workers. We can see that is about a little less than 70% whenever you bring in that agreement in total. But that's still pretty significantly low when it comes to a strong agreement on that issue. And then fair treatment for labor with pay and working conditions ranked 7th whenever we were asking about the most important factors that impacted buyers' purchasing decisions. And then when thinking about the farmers and ranchers themselves, their fair share of economic returns for the products that are in the store, that ranked about 5th whenever it comes to buyers' purchasing decisions. Just a couple last slides. 54% of folks believe that farm and ranch animals in Colorado are treated humanely. And I think maybe a reason why that number isn't as high as it could be is that about 24% of folks don't know if animals in Colorado are treated humanely. So again, telling better stories, making sure that transparency is key in informing folks of best practices that are being implemented in operations. And then also animal welfare approved and certified humane ranks as the second most influential production or processing claim when it comes to folks in the grocery stores. So with that, we are going to hand it over to Adrian, who's going to do a little moderation for Q&A.
Great, Jonathan, thank you. Wonderful presentation, y'all, really good. And you've been doing amazing job answering some questions in the Q&A box. Participants, attendees, if you have questions, now's the time to enter those in the Q&A. First up from John Bing Ma, some of the produce already has very good branding, such as the Rocky Ford melons. How can we expand the branding impact in the future? And Don, I think you were starting in on that one, so we'll pass it to you.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of why we're presenting this survey is I think this is exactly what some of our growers needs to take to the retailers as they negotiate market access and prices is the fact that usually it's the stores that have the better market research than the producers. And we're partly providing this so that they actually have some negotiating power to say, hey, they're looking for us. And you can continue to lose some of these sales to them stopping at roadside stands and grabbing them directly because they don't know how to find them in your stores. But, that's always ad hoc. This is survey evidence you can bring to them now saying, you want us in your store. We're a market leader. We'll get them in the store. So I don't know that some of these brands look like they need much more expansion. I think we need to learn how to leverage our data as well as they know how to leverage their data from the stores. That'd be my answer.
Great. Let's see here. John Recca has one. In one of the first slides, I noticed that there appears to be a significant decline between the two survey periods, with consumers expressing confidence that products are indeed local. How would you explain that?
There's been a pretty big concern nationwide and some articles all the way from New York Times to Washington Post about greenwashing, and local foods generally gets put in that same thing with greenwashing, people feeling like organic standards are lower. We did not include them today, but in the full report, you can see for the first time ever, we did add questions this year about what do you want when you say Colorado Proud? Does it need to be everything here? Does it need to be grown here, processed here, owned by here, and so forth? Or does it just need to be one of those steps? And we actually found pretty compelling evidence. We just didn't want to go that deep in the weeds today, that people really are looking for authentically. If it's Colorado Proud, it's just not someone having their headquarters here, shipping in all the ingredients. I think Chelsea asked about rice and then saying that's all good. They actually wanted to be everything. And oddly, Secretary Vilsack just had a press conference yesterday where that's going to be the new, it looks like, label for beef now, is if it's going to be US beef, and I guess you could say Colorado beef, it has to be born here, raised here, processed here, and sold here. So it looks like the USDA is going to go this direction without our survey results, shockingly. But we dug into that, and people really are watching and looking for evidence it's authentically local.
Fantastic. We're getting questions about next steps in this and where to find more information. Can one of you add the actual hyperlink to the chat for all of our attendees so they can click on that and go right to this same link you show on the slide now? Get another voice in here, Elizabeth Christensen. Seeing that food safety is a major concern for many Colorado consumers, what technical assistance is Colorado State University and the Colorado Department of Agriculture providing to help producers meet these expectations? Food safety. What are the gaps in current food safety training and support? Martha, maybe this one's for you.
I thought it might be. No, it's a good question, and I find it, every time we work on this survey, I find it very interesting how much food safety really resonates with consumers. And I think, you know, there are a couple of charges that this gives us, and that is, you know, to do more direct training of producers of all scales so that they're better equipped with that technical knowledge. But I think there's also a piece of helping them understand how to better convey what their practices are to consumers. So I think, you know, maybe even without having the direct training, a lot of producers really do have they have solid food safety practices. So helping them to be able to interact with consumers and explain what those are. There's really no labeling that explains that. So that's a bit of a detriment if we're looking specifically at product labeling. But in places where consumers can, you know, interact directly with producers, they have that opportunity to voice it.
Great. We've seen other questions internally on if people want to share this sort of through social media or emails, will you develop some sort of share kit that allows people to post where to find? Jonathan, I see you on.
Yeah, for sure. So right now, the College of Ag's communications team is actually working on creating a toolkit for sharing this information in just a more concise version. So if you're thinking about, you know, how do we talk about natural resource conservation? How do we talk about marketing practices? How do we talk about some of the brands and some of the labeling, things like that? Those will all be broken down into more concise, kind of bite-sized chunks here in the next couple of months. So I would just keep your eyes open for the College of Agricultural Sciences social channels.
Fantastic. Good deal. And the maybe we can grab that through CFEGA if one of you guys can send to us and share it out through there as well. I know Marilyn is superb at sharing information in that way. One more question here. You get another voice in, and then we'll go to wrap up. Do urban consumers believe that in the potential of urban agriculture, vertical agriculture, aquaponics, and similar to provide food security and resource conservation? I'm personally skeptical, but those are leading arguments for climate mitigation with high tech, precision ag, and food localization, including cellular cultivated meat. So sort of the what's next. Do urban consumers really believe in that?
We didn't include questions on any of that. So
Great question.
Sorry, we can't be helpful on that, but that sounds like a whole other interesting discussion. It's just we didn't. Every year we get a little creep where we get out a couple more questions and we just haven't gotten that far down the road yet. But we'll know that's top of mind maybe next time when we formulate a survey.
And if you guys haven't noticed, this is a long-term collaboration between CSU and Colorado Department of Agriculture every 5 years, going back to, when did you guys start this? The mid-90s?
It was before my time, 1996. So I didn't do the first two, but we've been on them since, I think, 2006, Martha? Yeah.
So they don't want to mix it up too much. They can see the long-term trends within the question. So one final question here from Tim Farrell. How can the difference between certified organic and organic be better defined for the consumer? National organic program versus just genuine or nebulous claims of organic.
It's really interesting. It was actually a study we did on the last survey, not this survey, but we had a grad student look at it, and it's odd, the same people who tend to value the third-party certifications like organic, they seem to be a different audience than the people who look for that first degree, 1 degree of separation, local market. So it almost is like it's two different marketplaces. There's people who don't go to direct and local markets, aren't making connections directly with farmers and ranchers, so they want a third-party certification to tell them what to buy. Then there's almost a whole other set of people who they want the story straight from the farmer or rancher's mouth. They're going directly, meeting them, perhaps even visiting their farms or at least hearing about the farms. So it's almost like we're starting to see a segmented marketplace to some degree, where organic is serving it for some people who a third-party certification is good enough. For some of these people who are really digging in for the authentic information about local, regenerative, whatever word you want to use, they're almost becoming separate segments of the market. And we that's from a study of the 2016 survey. We haven't dug into this one yet, but I would not be surprised to see a very similar finding happening here.
Great, Dawn. This recording will be posted to the CFEGA, Colorado Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association YouTube channel. You'll learn about that if you're subscribed to CFEGA's general interest email list. If you look in the chat, there's a link there on the bottom of that website for CFEGA. You can subscribe yourself to that general interest email list. And with that, I want to give a big thanks to our presenters today. Amazing information. I know there's more in there. You only had limited time to present it. So encourage all of you to look further. And thanks everyone for attending today. And we'll be in touch for future webinars. Have a great day.